welcome back. Today I will talk about lists in Python, how to start building up a list with different items, and then we go into fun stuff we can do with lists, including indexing and slicing. I opened Sublime Text. It's always good to move between different IDEs and text editors just for you to see different things. And I will run my script, which I call attempt.py from the command line, which again is another interesting skill you should pick up. So we could specify a list as follows. I just call this list empty because the list is indeed empty. You just use open and closed rectangular brackets. That's basically defining a list. If you do a print statement here and use a type function, which we covered before, and you ask what empty is, you should hopefully get the output empty is a list. Let's just save that. Go to the folder where it's stored. I put in cmd and I go straight into the folder. Then I type Python and the name of the file, which is attempt.py, and execute that. And you see here printed out the class is a list. So we started our first list, which is an empty list, not massively exciting. Good, let's just comment this one out and move to adding some stuff to the list. So for instance, we can have a few objects like A, which we assign to say 7, B we assign to 8, C we assign to -2, and maybe D, which we assign to fun. Of course, we already know that D would be a string and all the others are integers. Now in the case of a list is like a container. It can contain other objects, which is very helpful in many programming problems. So what we now can do is we can refer to our object empty, which is the empty list, and we can start adding stuff into it. We refer to the object, we now use the dot operator, and this opens up methods we can call on that particular object. So I just now use the append method, open close brackets, and I put in the stuff I want to append. Let's run this again. Now you see that 7 appears inside the rectangular brackets. So that's a list that contains 7, which is an integer. Let's add more stuff to it. Run this one more time. And now all these different objects become items, elements of the list, including the string as well. A list is not concerned about having the same type for each and every item. A list is literally a container. You can put all sorts of things into lists. You can also put a list into a list. The Len function gives me the number of items stored in the list. Let's just use that, and I want to also see that, so I use it in the print function. So after I print empty, I want to print len and put in empty as the argument, so that's the len function. And again, the len function should count the number of items that are in the list. It gives you the size of the list. Let's run this one more time, and here we see we have 4 items. Indexing means we can refer to different items on that list by referring to the position of the respective item, which is the so-called index. So for instance, if we go into print function, use rectangular brackets and put in number 0, that refers to the first item of the list. If I put in number 2, it would be the third item of the list. Python starts counting from 0. So it's 0, 1, 2, so 2 is the third item. So we have the full list, we have 4 items, size 4. We get the 7, that's the first position, and we get the -2, which is the third position, so it's index position 2. So we can use indexing to get access to different items stored in our list. If you want to have the last item on a list, you can use a very useful shortcut in indexing, and this is just simply putting -1. -1 refers to the last item of that list. Let's save it and run it, and let's see what happens. And now we have fun printed out, which is the last item on that list. Alternatively, you can always use the len function to get the last item. And here you have to be a bit careful. You can specify the len function. We know that the len function would be 4 in our case, and put that into the index. Let's see what happens here. Now you get an error message, an index error. 4 is not part of your index. Why? Because of course you start counting from 0. So it's 0, 1, 2, 3. So fun is 3. So if you want to use the len function to get the last item, you have to put this -1. Let's pop one item. So popping means you can get rid of an item on a list. I do empty again, so I refer to the object, which is no longer really empty. I use the dot operator, have access to the methods. I use the pop method, and now I put in the index positions. If I do -1, it would be the last item. So I start printing the list, and I also want to print the actual pop method itself and see what happens. This will give me a return value. Good, let's do that, run it one more time, and again you have the initial list, and then you get as a return value of the pop method the item which is popped, which is fun. That's the last item. So return value is not the list, it's the item that is removed from the list. And most importantly, and this might a little bit surprise you, the original list is now modified. Let's get a slice of you. Let's go back into the original list. I use rectangular brackets, can start at 0 and do colon and then 1. Now note the following. The first index I specify is inclusive. The last one is exclusive. So would it give me actually the first 2 items? And you see you only get the first item. If you want to have the first 2 items on the list, go up from 0 to 2 because 2 is exclusive. Now you get a 7, 8. The other thing to note is you don't have to specify 0. You can just leave it empty. Starting from the beginning is a default. The other thing you can do is you can use another default setting. If you just leave the last one blank, it just goes to the end of it. Now the other thing to note is having some steps in your slicing. Then you can do another column and specify, for instance, a 2, and that's the step. So it takes not the first one because it starts at 1. It doesn't take the next one because this would be step 1. It takes the one thereafter. It is step 2. If I use the pop method, as we saw before, it changes my original list. So I do a copy of empty. And one way to do a copy is to use what you call a shallow copy. Now here you just refer to the list empty, rectangular brackets, and just put the colon in. So it takes everything starting from 0 going up to the end. If I then, for instance, want to modify things, for instance, do here a copy pop, and I then specify 1, for instance, and see what happens to my copy list and the original list. So you see that's the list where I pop 1, but the original list is not affected. Another thing which I want to show you is changing the order of a list. You can, for instance, do a reverse, but there are many other methods you can call. I just want to show you this one. So if you go again to the copy and do reverse and open close brackets for the method to be called. So I use now the reverse method, and then when I do a print function on copy, we can see what happens to it. I now mute that, otherwise it's getting a little bit too busy with too many print functions. And now you see after you call your reverse method, it's changing the order of the items on the list. If you want to know what actually is returned here in the method, you can just do a print function on that method and you get none, which means there is no return value. It doesn't return anything. That's sometimes a bit tricky when you start coding in Python. You should always check what happens if you apply a method or a function. Is there a return value? What happens to the type? Sometimes the type is changing. So this can be quite tricky for beginners. The last thing I want to show you is I want to use the in and not operator. So if we, for instance, want to know whether D is in the list empty, I can ask this. I can also ask here whether D is not in empty. And you get a true and a false. Good, I see you in the next one.